will.
We've got a couple folks not going to make it today, Kai and Tracy. So welcome, Richard. Good to see you again.
The third time.
Is this you?
Stuart. Thank you for coming. Don't mean to give you a hard time. No, I'm sure I'll get it. I'd like to go over the approval of meeting minutes and ask for a motion. Get a chance to look at them and then motion, please.
Clearly, I can't do that since it's been noted I wasn't here.
Okay.
You can, though. Right?
I move that we accept the minutes as written.
I second the motion.
All those in favor, say, raise your hand. Opposed? Passes. Thank you. Any public comments, communications, member comments? Martine? I do have a note from staff that item 7, update on the STIP program and impact to the North Coast Corridor project is, we're going to remove that item. That item has to do more with the State Transportation Improvement Program and not Transnet funds. And I understand that at least the North Coast Corridor project is going to be able to move forward, and there is a little risk of some funding, but things look good. But it deals with STIP and not Transnet.
The progress will continue as planned.
Yes.
That's the only thing we can.
So with that, I'd like to remove that. And then so with that, we have consent items 3, 4, and 5, all information items. If anyone would like to discuss any of them, we'll pull them, let me know.
I just one question on the fee. I probably should know this, but who administers that money? This goes to the rate at which collected, but is this collected by the individual entities or is
individual local jurisdictions, so the cities and the county
it
are
does set the rate?
The board sets the adjustment every year, right? That's correct.
But the individual cities then collect it and administer it.
That's correct. And then you audit it.
And the granting of waivers is done at the individual level, the grant for low income?
Per the guidelines, per the policy and the ordinance provisions.
And we changed that several years ago, remember, for, was it low income?
Correct. There was an
Yeah,
amendment
okay.
to the RTCAP. Yeah, correct.
Can we say something about number 5?
Sure.
Okay. I'm just curious. I mean, I saw the things that were in here, the charts and so forth, but I would just like to hear possibly from Ray or Kim. I mean, do you feel comfortable with this? Whenever I see that we seem to be spending faster with less revenue coming in, I just get a little on the nervous side.
I'm going to come up a little.
Sure.
So the microphones can pick up here.
And you're referring specifically to our revised forecast with the reduction?
Yes.
Yeah, so last year we forecast that we were going to increase about 5% in terms of revenue. And there's been some weakening in the economy recently in terms of sales tax revenue collection. And so what we were doing is taking a more conservative approach and looking at what we've collected in the past year. And we revised the short-term forecast to about 3.5% in terms of the growth. Some of that has to do with the dollar being stronger, less activity across the border, and people spending money here, and from the euro. Also, taxable retail sales really haven't gone up very much in the last year, even though people are making a little bit more money. We don't really see that going up. So.
And gee, this is even before you thought about hometown buffet closing, right? I'm joking.
Just to your point, I mean, we use the forecast and to do the longer term, not just revenue projections, but the expenditure plans. And so by having a lower forecast, it essentially tells us that we need to be a little bit more conservative, cautious as we move forward on expenditure plans, so that we don't do exactly what you mentioned at the beginning.
Okay. And I know you guys because you're totally organized. So have you already have some kind of plan in mind for, if things are even less than you expect, what you're going to cut? Do you cut equally, percentage-wise? Do you have some projects that have to go through because, you know, they're on the ground, others you can delay? I mean, how does that work?
Well, typically when we look at any potential changes to the expenditure plan, we look at where are the projects in the project development process. So there are certain projects that you don't want to slow down, those that are out in construction, for example. There may be other projects that we may need to slow down on. So it really depends on the magnitude of the reduction, which color of money, for example, is being impacted. So we look at all of those things and then we develop options if necessary and present them, you know, to the board.
Okay. Thank you.
Actually, if I could ask a related question. To Carolyn's point, I'm curious how you sort of build in sort of risk or probability into the forecast. In other words, you know, you might say that there's, if you're looking for a 3.5% increase, if that's the official forecast, there may be a higher confidence level that it's going to be at least 1%, and maybe there's a 10%, you know, there's a 10% chance it could be 5%. I mean, how do you?
Well, so there's
if you know what I mean?
Yes. So you're saying that like there's an optimistic forecast, there's a pessimistic one, and then there's one that we believe is in the middle that's the most realistic. And so essentially what happens is that a lot of this is based on population and number of jobs is really the driver for this. So what we're looking at is what type of job growth we have in the region and how much money we think is going to be spent in the region. So we're looking at a relatively, it's a conservative forecast, but there, I mean, we do have more optimistic and pessimistic ones too. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, I guess I'm thinking in terms of, is there an explicit kind of confidence level or probability attached? You know, there's that very famous scene, you hear the story that when President Obama was trying to make a decision, should we go in after bin Laden, he went around the room and he asked everybody, what's the probability that, you know, bin Laden is there? And some people said 60%, some people said 30%. I'm curious if there's sort of that kind of probabilistic.
With this not with this short-term forecast. I mean, with this particular one, we were doing more of a point forecast or taking a look at what the trends were coming in from the past couple of years and what we see the long-term forecast looking like, and then tempering it with the type of with whatever reports I'm hearing that are happening in the economy at the national level and at the state level. See what drivers we would have here in San Diego.
I have one more question, just a matter of curiosity. When the stock market takes a plunge, like it's been doing recently, does that trickle down to what happens to spending in the local economy?
Well, eventually it does, because it impacts incomes at the end of the day, depending on how much people are relying on that. So at the state level, you'll see a high correlation between stock market prices and amount of tax collection, because people are paying taxes when they sell those stocks. So when this type of thing happens, and I have, you know, the presentation that I was going to do for the next item, that does impact people's ability or willingness to spend on taxable sales items, and that's one of the reasons that we don't see a lot of growth, even though we have some population growth. We're not seeing a lot of growth in sales tax revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? I noticed, thank you.
Oh, sure.
I noticed, Keith, on your item, on number 4, I was just curious, just a comment, the future focus of the mitigation program, and notice it says research into North County on the movement patterns and hindrances for large mammals by transportation infrastructure. I was just curious. That's interesting focus on trying to figure out what's crossing the road, and is that what that's all about? It's just a.
What are the large mammals?
It's not a chicken. Could be a chicken. Live chicken go too? No, not a problem.
Is that?
It's mountain lions and deer. Those are the 2 major focuses. So, side note, I have to tell you because it's interesting, that we are getting all the Orange County mountain lions coming down to San Diego.
Is this true?
This is true, but they're not going back. So like San Diego. And I said, no, it's not. But from a genetic standpoint, something's prohibiting them from going back up. We're not sure what that is. And so that's causing a problem for the mountain lions as an intra-regional area. So that's the focus.
That's
That's,
interesting.
Why do you assume they would want to go back up?
I keep telling my Orange County counterparts, but you know, there's their habitat down here. I don't know, there's more open land.
Well, actually, on that point, I mean, does it potentially speak to the success of the program that you're running, or and that others are paying attention to in terms of habitat?
There's two ways of looking at that. You can be a pessimist or an optimist. The optimist says, yes, we have more habitat down here, they're attracted to that. That's the optimist. The pessimist is saying that they're getting killed so much in Orange County from the freeways and the roads up there, and they're not getting killed down here, so they migrate down to avoid that. So I don't know which one's correct, but that's where that whole research comes from.
Not the result of the tourism board.
Keith, it's always a good report to read, though. Thank you for this summary. It's always good. So items 3, 4, and 5 on consent. For a motion to support.
Well, it's just
Oh,
information.
Information. It is information. So thank you. Ariana, number 6.
Number
reports.
6, since your January meeting, the Transportation Committee met on January 15th. They reviewed the Smart Growth Incentive Program and the Active Transportation Grant Program quarterly report and proposed amendment that you saw at your last meeting. They adopted the 2014 Article Amendment number 9 and recommended approval of both the 2015 Plan of Finance and the 2015 Transit Operations Plan of Finance. And then the Board of Directors approved both those Plan of Finance updates at their meeting on January 22nd. And then last week at the February 5th Transportation Committee meeting, they reviewed the Senior Mini Quarterly Report, the EMP Annual Status Update, and the EMP Call for Projects. All of those were reviewed and no significant comments on any of those.
Thank you. And I noticed that we talked about this yesterday, invitations to events that we've been invited to as a group. And
That's right.
Thank you for sending those to us.
Yep.
It's good to go to some of those.
Yeah. So it did go to
There's
the
just-
ITALC distribution list. There's one for the South Bay BRT,
So that I
and then there's also one for the SR15 commuter bike facility projects, which you should have received as
I
well.
don't know
So
if I got moved on
if
that
you didn't
one.
get that one, then we'll make sure you.
But I think it's just good to, thank you.
Absolutely. Okay.
Good
So
to
we will
get
send
to
that one
some of
out.
last month, Stuart, we talked about the board retreat.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about
They
that.
did last year, and you and I attended. We talked a little bit about the board retreat coming up next month.
Yeah,
And
March.
if folks are gonna go, so,
Yeah, I would just throw in, I thought that was fabulous for other members of the committee who had the time to make it. It was really very educational.
Yeah, and the primary, there'll be some other presentations, but the Thursday, which is the full day, will be, primarily devoted to discussion of the potential future sales tax measure. And the other days, I think we have something on freight, and then, I'm trying to think what else we have on the other days. Something just generally on other sales tax measures and other kind of measures expected on the upcoming ballots.
thank you. Item 8, Ariana, for our annual operating budget.
Item 8 is your FY17 proposed annual operating budget. So the ITALC submits an annual operating budget every year to the Board of Directors for their approval. And then, of course, you review your budget every quarter with Lisa's report. That's also on your agenda today. The ordinance states that all the costs for administering ITALC activities are to be paid from the sales tax proceeds. And then the funds that are made available are not to exceed $250,000, as you know, after an adjustment for inflation every year. Funds that aren't used in one year are to carry forward to the next, and that's particularly for the years when you conduct your triennial performance audit, when your expenses are likely to exceed $250,000, such as last year, fiscal year 2015. You'll also recall that in years when the ITALC doesn't have a triennial audit to conduct, such as FY13, 14, and the current FY16, you've decided to forego your annual allocation and cover your expenses through the carryover funds that are available from prior years. And attachment 1 of your report shows your proposed ITALC budget for FY17. At the beginning of FY17, you'll note that carryover funding is about $231,000, and that's enough to cover approximately $128,000 of your expenses that we're estimating for next year. through the end of 2017, or FY17. You could decide to keep your allocation for FY17, or you could elect to forego next year's allocation, which is projected to be about 401,000. If you elect to forego, that allocation amount would then be distributed to all the other Transnet programs and projects per formula. The flow of funds is attachment 2 to your report, so it would just flow like to the other programs. You could take action today to recommend that the board approve your FY17 budget, or you could have us come back with any changes that you might like to see, and then recommend adoption at your March meeting. The ITOC is asked to discuss the proposed draft fiscal year 2017 ITOC annual operating budget and determine if it would like to forego its annual FY17 allocation.
I have a question. Remind me again, on the triennial audit, do we have an existing contract with somebody, or we have to start all over again?
We have to start all over again this time, and the timeline for that is sometime this summer. We'll be bringing to you a draft scope of work and a proposed approach for you to consider. So, and then you'll form a subcommittee, a performance audit subcommittee, and then that RFP, we'll have to advertise that, and that'll take the bulk of next fiscal year to conduct. And then you would start your next triennial performance audit, which is the 4th audit, on July 1, 2018. No,
Okay.
2017, sorry.
Okay, that's what.
Fiscal year 18, yeah.
Okay, so there is a method in my question, because I wondered, I don't remember what the expenses were going back, and I'm sure they've increased now. But since you're pretty familiar with what we've had to pay in the past, do you think the way this is proposed, that if we keep foregoing our annual allocation, that we will have enough money for what I call the pre-expenses, getting to the point where the auditor starts work?
Definitely. It'll be mainly staff hours, which are not charged to this budget. So our contract staff that conducts the RFP, so that'll happen next fiscal year. So that's why you don't see that here. But
Okay,
yeah.
so the advertising, do we pay for it?
No, that comes out of a different.
But it's not our budget. I mean, when you have to advertise for.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Right. But we do have advertisement dollars here, actually.
Right,
So
I see, I just don't know if
Yeah,
that was
we
an
do.
advertisement. Okay.
that, however, may be for the solicitation, because we have to do a new ITOC solicitation in no, that's not until FY18. No, FY17. When do we have to? May 2017. So yeah, so FY17.
Yes.
Two quick questions. First of all, these are 6-month figures for 2016. First question is, do we have anything on the horizon for the next 6 months to indicate that we need more than a total of $40,000? And secondly, is that $40,000 number the full cost of the annual fiscal audit?
So
we budgeted 101,000, but it only cost us 40,000.
to date. So for the 6 months ending December, and Lisa's here, she manages that contract.
But
But
will
the
there be any
invoices-
more money required than 40,000?
Not more than this, because it was set per the agreement with the fiscal auditor, so we're in good shape there. However, the invoices come in a little after the field visits, which are barely
Yeah,
roughly
Is it
so-
about the
gonna be
price point.
101,000
It
or?
won't be, looking back at the history of this contract, the contract includes two portions. There's the audit, and then there is the other charges for travel expenses. That typically is not fully utilized, so majority of the 101 will be spent, but there's always a carryover. There's always an unspent portion somewhere in a couple $1,000.
So the actual cost should be $101,000 for 2016?
It'll be probably in the high 90s.
Okay.
And one thing to note is that you still have carryover, that 230 that from
No,
prior.
I
If we needed to
understand.
do an amendment so that we could pay
Okay.
something, we can always do that.
And Mr. Chair, I don't see why we have to budget anything for the following year unless the rest of the committee feels, I don't know, I don't see where we need to accept continue our allocation for 2017.
Rather than we have done that several years now, and
We
I've
have.
always supported that, but given the fact that the following year is the big budget year, and
That's
if we
right.
don't take a budget this year, then we'll
You're thinking
we'll be
that
down
that
close. So I'm
for
wondering,
triannual, we ought to be carrying over something?
stuff happens, and I gather we can't reach back. All the donations we have given in previous years, we can't recall those.
Right.
So if not take the whole budget, at least take half of it or something to build a cushion on.
Whatever the committee feels is appropriate.
You do have that carryover,
I'm looking at that.
however, yeah, okay. Yeah, you could certainly, it could be a portion
So
instead of
If
the
we
entire.
take no budget and the numbers prove to be accurate, we can spend 128, we have 230 taken over, so whatever that is, 30.
If I could, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the carryover balance is in the vicinity of the expected cost of the triannual performance audit. Am I reading that correctly?
Approximate, so the triennial audit has been approximately 260.
Right.
And right now your
260.
carryover is 238.
Right.
And then remember, next year, this time around, we'll be going through this again, and you'll have your allocation for FY18, which you
Right.
would not forego, which will be another 400,000.
Yeah, so my point being,
So you'll be good.
it's almost as if the triannual audit is already paid for based on what we already have in the
Correct.
bank.
Assuming you
That's my
take,
thought process.
assuming you take the full budget for this year.
Is that inclusive or I thought, no, that's exclusive of taking the allocation for
Right.
this year. I can't
Because
read.
correct, next year, this time around, you'll be taking an action whether you want to forego the FY18 412,000. And if you don't, you'll have that 412,000 available to you in FY18, or some portion. So,
The FY18 budget ought to take care of the FY18 expenses,
more than enough.
with a slight positive error, whatever it is, $10,000
Mhm.
to do good.
Right.
Should be good.
If we take nothing for 17 and we spend the 128, that'll be paid for out of the 230 carryover. So there'll be 60 on top of that.
Right.
See, what you're proposing, Richard, is what member of our member agencies do. They don't spend the annual allocation, they're carrying it over for future projects. I'm just being facetious. So there is a precedent, certainly.
I certainly wouldn't argue for taking the full budget, but just add a protection, some portion of the budget.
Okay, I have another question, just because of what Ray was talking about earlier. I'm just curious. If our revenues go down, does our budget go down? If we start finding that, maybe you guys have been too optimistic about revenues, will this mean it'll have an impact on our budget?
Well, ultimately, it's estimated, right? Current year was estimated.
But
We won't
it's-
know until the end of the year, until
No,
everything's.
it's based on the 250,000 original, and then that gets adjusted
Okay,
every
so we
year.
don't have, we're not
Yes.
tied to what you
No.
guys take in?
No,
Okay,
it's
then I'm
all
fine.
fixed allocation, yeah.
It's the pleasure.
I defer to greater wisdom, so those of you who are really into, understanding all the finances, whatever you say is whatever I vote.
And the triannual budget expense will come in fiscal 2018, is that correct?
That is correct.
So just, if I'm reading this all correctly, just to try to summarize, if we take 0 for or if we forego the allocation for 2017, then the sort of the cash balance, if you will, or the carryover, basically will have been fully spent by the end of next year.
I think we'll-
by the end of the year? Is that
I think
correct?
we'll still have a carryover of about $120,000.
Yeah, the difference between
The
that
524
230
at
and the
the very bottom
128.
end of the
Yeah.
year
Mhm.
balance.
You'll have about
Mine,
100
if
in.
you take away the 401, you'll still have about 120,000 carryover.
Yeah, can I say something here?
100 and
So if
23,000.
if we look at it from historical on how things have carried forward, and from also what the cash balance was at the end of fiscal year 15, that would be the 251,000, right? So it's the carryover, the 231, but there's an additional interest component that's carried forward through the years. So you really have a balance of 250,000. But then also look at the spending habits of the ITAC as a whole in an annual year. There's only been one time that the reserve has been partially spent, and only part of those other three components there, the mileage, advertising, and postage, is spent down. Majority of that is carried forward. So if, you know, if I would look at this as kind of a starting position in fiscal year 17 at about 270,000. So that would leave you with about 140 if you didn't take anything.
Right, yeah, I realized I did my math wrong, right, yeah. So if we take zero, there would be an end of fiscal year 2017 balance of $140,000.
Exactly.
So in a sense, that could conceivably be viewed as a cushion going into the fiscal 18, right?
And I was just gonna say.
Along with a $400,000 allocation.
If we take the full
for
allocation.
2018.
Right.
Well, I think that, I mean, that discussion right there, I mean, I don't think you need that.
Mr. Chair, I would move that we take a zero allocation this year.
I'll second that. Unless the written, if you have strong feelings.
I rolled.
You what?
I rolled.
What?
I rolled over.
Yeah, you rolled over.
You died, Dennis?
You changed parties?
You crossed the free line.
Okay.
Well,
I'm good with that.
any discussion then on that? All those in favor of taking no allocation, correct, on that?
Yes.
Did I say it?
That's right.
Raise your hand. Any opposition? Abstention?
I would request that our Public Relations Committee make sure the press picks up this. One of the rare times a governmental agency has declined a budget allocation. And
What a bargain we are.
Lisa, you cleared that up awfully quick, thank you. I think now with that, yeah, item 9, right?
So I will not be covering that attachment today, since we just did that. So this is the December 31st quarterly report. And as you may recall, we did not bring the September data to you due to the change in timing of the ITAC meeting. We were unable to compile the information. So the last time we were here was in September, bringing the June data. And of course, that was prior to June closing, so it really wasn't final. So here we are in December. And so we have our various attachments that we usually go through. Attachment 1 is the quarterly report that breaks down the activity by each of the recipients in our street and road program, the cities and the county, as well as the transit operators and each of the other programs. It also provides on pages 4 and 5 some of the debt activity to show you with our commercial paper program, as well as our various bond programs, so you can see what has been spent for each of those different bonds. Were there any questions, specific questions on this?
just the first one, the total allocation, I think I'd understand that. Total disbursements, this would be the money that actually has moved from Sandag to, for example, the city of San Diego.
Correct.
This doesn't speak to the extent which they have actually encumbered that or spent it or anything. That's a
right. This is just from our records, exactly.
And just focusing on that one, if I'm reading the fine print, their allocation would have given them 226 million, and you have, in fact, distributed 170 of that 226. Am I reading that right?
I'm sorry, which was
City
specific
of San Diego.
jurisdiction? For which one?
City of San
City of
Diego.
San Diego. Yes, so about 171 million, and that's program to date. We have paid to them, or there's also other costs involved in that. Let's see. there might be actually some return of funding might be in there, and then there's some early action project payments, but it's mostly the payments to the city directly.
So there's 56 million that hasn't been yet distributed, but
Yes,
sits on their account here.
correct. And that's actually shown in
Attachment
it's
two.
one of the other
Page
attachments.
6, attachment
Six.
2.
And I always struggle to remember all the little dissertations we get from the city of how wonderful things are improving. But is their process such that they can't commit to a project until they've drawn the money from you? Or given the fact that it's on account with you and they know they have the ability to reach it, they can go ahead and commit?
Yes, they can. That's right. As long as we have it on hand, they commit.
So they could well have commitments
Yes,
that would consume all that, they just haven't drawn it from you yet.
right.
Okay.
That is correct.
So
Yes.
this is not necessarily an indictment of their inaction, you can't tell from here.
You cannot tell.
Thank you.
Mirroring that question, would it be the case, though, that is disbursement related to actual activity? In other words, there's a reference, I think, in footnote 4 and attachment 2, regular monthly payments to local agencies as requested. Do they have the right to actually request that the monies be dispersed regardless of their level of activity of use?
Absolutely. As so there are two ways, two things that we look at when they request a payment. It has to be programmed in the RTIP,
Right.
and we have to have cash available. And that's all that we look at. If it's programmed, then they have an intent. Timing of the expenditures, that's on their side. So if they want the funds now, knowing that perhaps invoices won't come in for another, 3 to 6 months, that's fine. Could be that they're drawing the funds from us on a reimbursement basis. Some jurisdictions do it that way, and that's fine as well.
Yes. So in effect, the disbursement report is kind of like a balance sheet analysis. It really is not an indicator of actual
Exactly.
activity.
Yes.
Right.
And they earn interest either way, I mean, they're earning interest for their account if they leave the money here.
Correct, and they're earning interest on funds that they're sitting on as well, that must be
That's what I
used
mean.
towards the projects.
Following up on Stuart's question, looking at attachment 2 on page 6 in the city of San Diego, please. If you will look at the amount, the way I read this, and Lisa, am I right? Columns D and E, for the city of San Diego, Sandag is holding 55 million plus
Yes.
in your account, and yet they have overexpended 13.3 million, 13.4 million.
Yes.
Which they will be asking Sandag for
Correct.
in the near future to pay those bills.
Yes.
And I think that's specifically what you were saying, wasn't it, Stuart? That they have spent money that is being held by Sandag.
That actually is a different point, but I was just trying to clarify the degree to which disbursement itself implies any degree of activity, and you're saying that they're really unrelated, and so looking at that figure probably is more indicative of the monies that have actually been spent.
All right, that's my only
Well,
other.
Jonathan, on that note then, so the $13 million that's sitting there that they need from Sandag, where, is that coming at some point?
Right, so the jurisdictions, we have payments 11 out of 12 months every year. And so we have a process, and they submit their payment requests as often as they want. And the city has been submitting on a monthly basis. Was it January, we made something like a $20 million payment to them. So they are catching up.
Why would you envision the city spending more money than they have when they have a bank account they could draw it out of?
Or for clarification, does that negative 13 million balance indicate that they've actually spent the money, or in fact that's money that they have
Obligated.
committed to or sort of invoiced for disbursement?
This should be based on, as close to cash basis as possible. There might be some accruals in there, but it's looking at what funds they have left in their extension projects. Now, the city of San Diego also has some old Transnet from the original ordinance, so they might actually have overall a positive cash balance, and so that's why they're able to carry this negative balance. But you know, this negative balance should represent programmed projects that they can, you know, then draw the funds from us, and these would be expenditures, actual expenditures.
It's cash,
on
not
this.
commitment, so it's just
Yeah.
a strange thing that you would think the city would be taking the money out of someone else's bank account when they own it and not have a negative.
But they may not have been billed yet.
For, as part of this negative 13, no. It would either be actual payments that they've made so far, or perhaps due to the timing of when they put this together, they may have received invoices in the following, like in January, and they've accrued those back to December, so they've included it in here. But it would still be based on actual payments.
It's really none of our business. It's just
It's
jumped
none
out
of
of
our
as an
business.
unusual practice that maybe they've got an explanation for.
It's a matter of curiosity. This is the form that we have looked at, that we have asked for,
Yeah.
and it helps to understand it a little bit.
So since we're on attachment 2, column J is always the focus to see which jurisdictions, after we look at funds that have been received so far, column A. Column B is the expected revenues through the rest of the year. Then we look at what's been dispersed, taking into account between what Sandag is holding and the local jurisdictions, balances to see what really cash is on hand. And then we look at, of what has been programmed, what is still remaining, what's their plan, to determine, do they have a plan to spend at least 75% of their expected revenues through the year, through the end of the year. So we have only the 2 that did not meet that criteria, and they both have submitted letters of explanation as attachments. Carlsbad, which this has been ongoing for about a year, it's same project, it's basically the same reason. I think there are a couple of changes. And then Encinitas, and Encinitas almost made it. They're very close. So they have also provided their letter. And then you also notice there are a handful of jurisdictions that are in bold, that are above 100%, and each of those jurisdictions is in our, one of our bond issuances, and so therefore they've advanced funding through the bond and moved ahead of their annual revenues.
Are those for specific projects at all, or is that what?
For the ones that are in the bond?
Anything over the 100%, is that, when you say that, is that?
So when we go through the process of approving their entering the bond program and advancing, yes, it is typically, at that time, it is for a very specific project or projects, but we do open the language to say any other approved project. It has to meet certain criteria in order to be in the debt program, and every so often we do have a change in project, and we go through an approval process for that. We'll be going through a commercial paper process. Right now I have it on the March agenda. It might move to April. And so you'll be able to see the language at that time, how we write it out in our agreement with the city.
Could I ask, when we have that discussion, we don't need to do it now, but make sure we have an understanding of the collateral that backs, if they're writing on our debt financing, and something goes wrong with their ability to pay, what happens? What kind of priorities do we have a call on their tax revenue stream and what have you? Just so
Right, so we have a process in place where when the sales tax comes in on a monthly basis, we just take 1/6 or 1/12, depending on when the payments are. Principal payments are on an annual basis for bonds. Interest is every 6 months, so we would take 1/6 of the upcoming interest
mean
payment.
that-
We just take
The
it.
tax revenue flows through you first before it gets to them, so you have all the
Absolutely.
power in the
Oh,
world.
yeah. So we don't even touch it. It stays with the trustee. It goes from the state to the trustee, and we say, hold this aside, place it into these accounts. So when the payments come due, the trustee already has the full payment.
But it,
But if tax revenues were to drop significantly, what priority do we have?
Priority one,
Priority one, okay.
always.
I'll buy that paper.
Were there any other questions on attachment 2?
I had one kind of unrelated.
Yeah.
I've seen now about 3 times an advertisement on TV for one of the North County cities. I think it was Carlsbad or Encinitas, where the firemen are out there advocating a vote on an ordinance
Oh,
for traffic congestion, for the safety and everything. That some you're nodding, you understood.
I've seen it.
I've
What
seen
what
it.
city is
Isn't
that?
it the
It's
Carlsbad?
Carlsbad.
Carlsbad.
Yeah.
It's for development.
It's a local
I'm just
issue.
curious, if obviously they have a need, and I assume it's a bond initiative or something that they're trying to get passed. That would be additional revenues for their traffic congestion over and above anything that we're supplying here.
Mhm.
Do we know the rough magnitude of what they're looking for compared to what they get out of this program?
How much they might earn in some sense? I don't know.
Carlsbad's the one that hasn't been spending this money because they've been saving up for their big project, but that's got nothing to do with this
Right.
initiative for whatever.
What was it, the founding?
No, the initiative is basically to permit a really large-scale development.
Right.
On some property adjacent to Interstate 5.
By the lagoon, by the strawberry fields?
Strawberry Fields, yeah, it's east of Interstate 5.
The developer's gonna pay for a lot of the road improvements, I
Improvements.
think, as a result of that.
The firemen are talking about it facilitates flow of traffic for safety reasons.
Yeah, that's a campaign.
I
Yeah.
caught my attention.
Lisa, on the city of Encinitas, I see we have a letter from them, but on Carlsbad, we just talked about some big project. You know, what's that project? Are they?
They
holding up?
previously have presented that project to us, I believe.
Yes, they
Yes.
have.
Which? Oh, it's back page.
Yeah.
Look
Yeah,
at
it's
us. Oh, boy. Thank you.
Like looking for your
Because I noticed this
sunglasses.
one didn't have it, so.
It's like looking for your sunglasses when you're on your forehead.
So I'm gonna move on to attachment 3, which is, it provides the sales tax that's been received, for the first 6 months, and then it compares, over the prior year, so you can see, where we're at. Also, the current projection, we haven't changed that yet until the board, approves the revision. We keep this at the 5%, which is up in the top, the right-hand column. And as of December, we were at 3.09. I think through February, 3.17. It's come up a little bit since December. So we're getting closer to a 3.5%, which would be nice.
This is the point that Ray spoke to earlier. That
Yes.
This actual is what causes him to
Right.
reduce down his forward
Right.
projection.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can see the reason for changing, just kind of in a snapshot here.
The good news is it's considerably better than prior year. The bad news is it's less than what we'd hoped for.
Exactly. And attachment 4 is the budget analysis, which has already been covered in the last item, so unless there's a specific question, I'll just pass on over that one. So attachment 5 is specifically looking at the 30%, the maintenance portion of the local street and road funding. And the idea here is to determine if any of the jurisdictions have received more than 30% of their allowable revenues, which they have not. column E is going to show you what the total total maintenance balance would be should we have enough funds available to pay those amounts there, which isn't always the case, because remember, some jurisdictions spend more than 70% on their congestion relief projects. So for example, third one down, City of Coronado, if we just purely look at 30% balance, that would be the almost 3 million. However, they have spent more of their funds on congestion relief, so they only have 1.2 million cash available. So ultimately, that would be the maximum that we could pay them in any maintenance payment request at this point.
Lisa, these numbers are cumulative, correct? The title of this program, of this page says cumulative
Yes.
Sandag activity. Cumulative since when, 2004?
No, this would be since July 1st, 2008, fiscal year
2000, is that when this?
Yes, that's when we started collecting the revenues for the extension program.
And that was the Transnet Extension Program?
Yes.
So basically, they can spend more than 30% one year if they have plans to reduce in subsequent years to get back to, the 30% refers to cumulative.
It's cumulative, so we always look at basically columns E and F. What is the cumulative, in this month, what is the cumulative balance allowed, 30% in total? Plus, what cash do we have available? And so we do not let them receive more than 30%.
But it's not what Jonathan said.
No, you can't advance your 30%.
You can't advance.
Without approval, there is.
You can catch up, but you can't
Or you
advance.
can catch up, but you can't advance.
Right, so they can use, for the first 10 years, they can spend all of their allocations on congestion relief projects, and then maybe in a couple years after that, just move over to maintenance. And as long as we're tracking this, we know what that amount, what that 30% maintenance amount will be at that point.
But you can't do the opposite.
But you can't do the opposite. Without approval, if there's a reason, they can request an exception to that section of the ordinance and come to you, or Transportation Committee, and then the board to obtain approval. And that would be a one-time approval, just for that year, or possibly a couple of years.
But this has not been a problem in the past. People have abide by this.
Yes, and in fact, in the audit, so you'll see the drafts in the next, your next meeting, we added a procedure this year to specifically look at this and see with what they have, their spending, and because there is some movement of funds on their side, plus what we have, where are they now? What actual percentage are they at? And one of the jurisdictions that I just reviewed yesterday, between what's happening there and what's happening at Sandag, they're at 28.1%. So they're pretty close to their 30%.
Well, I don't mean to nitpick numbers, but can you explain, let's say, City of Carlsbad and the City of National City, where it appears that they haven't spent any of the maintenance funds? In other words, they've spent everything for congestion relief.
They can do it.
They're not
And they can-
required
right.
to.
They're not required
They're
to.
not required.
There is no requirement.
They're just prohibited from spending more than 30%.
Exactly.
In the case of City of Carlsbad, their maintenance balance is in excess of what we've allocated to them. That includes funds, that other sources of funds that,
Right, so they would have taken their funding from their congestion relief. I'm sorry, that they would have taken, for the congestion relief projects, they would have taken some of the funds that are available for the maintenance projects.
I'm sorry, and I'll be quiet, but it says that column A, the maintenance Transnet funds allocated is 5.2 million, and yet the total maintenance balance in column E is 7.6 million. And that must include other funds,
Read footnote 2.
footnote 2, but that's the balance.
Transnet One funds, I think, Stuart, is,
It looks.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Mhm. Am I-
because Stuart's point is well taken, that they may have monies left over from Transnet One.
Oh, Transnet.
Yeah,
one
so that's
funds.
column B. So A is
Okay.
purely sales tax, and then B is going to be revenue
But
and.
then they may also have funds left over from Transnet
Yes.
One.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just keep you on your toes.
This is not our business, as long as what they're doing is legal and the proper place to spend their money.
You know, just on that point, I was going to say in our discussion of attachment 2, whether for anybody else or not, I don't know, but for me certainly, it actually is really helpful that when you added in those little formulas underneath the columns, and maybe this is another,
But we can do
because
that.
you're right, I mean, Jonathan's right, it is counterintuitive to just see City of Carlsbad at 7.6 and wonder how is that possible given the 5.8, and then you kind of have to go through, read the footnote. Maybe just the addition of those formulas might help
Sure.
give clarity to that.
We'll do that for the next one.
Very much helpful for attachment 2.
I think the thing that's interesting when you step back, correct me if I'm wrong, but the original intent of the initiative was to put money out there, but the worry was the cities would take this new money and spend it on maintenance and relieve their existing budget. So that's what the reason for the 30% cap for maintenance. And it's interesting to see that there hasn't been any apparent pressure to exceed that 30. In fact, several cities are under the 30. So they're very good citizens relative to what the original fear was of how this would be manipulated.
Okay, so moving on to attachment 6, and this is the grant program balances. At the last meeting, it was requested that we add a little bit more in here. So originally, we were showing you the total revenues received. We were not providing any of the regional revenue. We were just then saying, well, here's what's been committed for the grant programs and the expenditures and the unspent. So there was a piece that was missing. So we were asked to add in this regional or the non-grant revenue. And so we worked with the administrators of each of the grant programs, and there is somebody representing each of the grant programs here today, should you have specific questions. And so this is what we came up with. And there are a lot of footnotes to this schedule, because the cycles, for one thing, are a little bit different between the different programs, how they've compiled the data. So you may see, let's see, which one do I want to, so let's see. So we have, Smart Growth has, who do they have? They have, their cycles go through FY16. So they're going to be taking into account, and they're awarded grant revenue of the 30 million there. They're taking into account what has been awarded for all of FY16, whereas the revenue received is only giving you the revenue through December. And for, I think one of them goes out further for 8. It's 8. So for the senior mini grants, they're awarded grant revenue. So the projects that have received awards is going out through FY17. So it goes out a little bit further. So you see that right there exceeds what's been received thus far. And that would be the reason. We're showing you revenue received through December 31st, but the agreements are taking into account the other 6 months of this fiscal year plus what's going to be received in the next fiscal year. Yes?
I have a question for Keith. Keith, I love the way you've been handling the environmental mitigation program, and I'm wondering now, in the past, you had problems because we buy a land for environmental banking, so-called, and then who's going to take care of it so it doesn't get degraded? So just give me a quick update. Do some of these grants now almost come simultaneously? In other words, we buy the land, we take ownership, and then hopefully within a month or less, do we, or I'm too optimistic? Okay, fill me in on that, because I know that we spend a lot of money on the banking program, but I'm worried about that time when no one's overseeing it.
So remember, the EMP program has two pods to it, or two funds. One is for the buying of land and taking
Right.
care of it for our regional transportation projects, and the other one is for our habitat conservation, so that we make sure that the land out there isn't degrading. The numbers shown here are for that second pile, the habitat
Okay.
conservation fund. You bring up a good point, though, is that, call it excess land. Once we get our land that we've acquired, we've used it, it's received its mitigation, we want to turn it over to somebody. And it's that process on the first fund that we are working on right now. How do we actually turn land over to some qualified third party and have them make sure that they fund it, manage it in perpetuity? And we are still
Because they usually don't want it. I remember they don't want it because it's an expense. Nobody wants a gift that's gonna cost them money.
it's a liability, so we have to bring endowments and funding to them. And there are groups that want to take over that's their business model. You know, we will manage property for you if you fund us. And so that is being taken care of out of the larger biological mitigation fund, which is not reflected in these numbers, different pot amount.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Just to follow up on that, what do you do, hold a competition then, or do you struggle to find anybody who's willing to take your money to manage your property for you?
So we have an RF request for proposals out right now for some properties in which we want to get rid of that excess land. We first go to government entities. It makes sense. If the county has property that they want to expand to park, the cities, we go to them first. But if they say, no, we're not interested, it's a liability. It's too far away from our current operations. Then we look towards the nonprofit sectors and try to find a person that's going to take on that property. And state law is very specific on who can manage properties and who can hold endowments. 2 years ago, there was a law passed by Senator Kehoe, I think it was 2 years ago, that says it has to be X, Y, and Z, has to be accommodated. So we're in the process right now of going through our first ever, getting rid of some Caltrans property for excess lands that the mitigation's already been taken care of.
So you don't know what kind of response you're gonna get?
We do not know, but we will
But
report back to that in
For me
6
to
months.
apply, for example, I have to meet certain criteria
Yep.
set by state law.
Set by state law.
And then I might be competing with Carolyn, whoever is willing to take the smaller endowment for a given level of management, they win the competition.
That's right.
Are the provisions that Senator Kehoe wanted included rising the cost of the land? See, I have no idea what she asked for. I'm just curious, because a lot of times when somebody says, you have to do this, this, and this, it means more dollars. Am I right or wrong?
It's more financial practices. For example, you have to follow some uniform financial practices for endowments. So those are established already, and what she did is codify that. It says, you must, as an endowment holder, do this. You can't no longer just operate independently. You also have to have certain years' experience. So what she did is she put in legislation that says, if you don't meet these standards, you don't qualify. So don't bother trying to.
Applying, yeah.
But that doesn't apply to government entities, and again, that's our first choice. Go to a government entity.
Well, stay tuned, because this is gonna be very interesting. Do you have any gut feeling on how many applications you will receive?
Well, we've gotten a lot of interest in the RFP in terms of, even before it's gone out, people wanting to know when it's about. The question, I think, really is how many qualified entities are going to be applying? And I don't know that question. But we will have a workshop, we'll explain all these provisions, and then when we get actual requests back or responses back, we'll see what the response is.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it. Good. Thank you.
Lisa, you and I talked before the meeting about the fiscal compliance audit.
Yes.
For next month, we're going to be asked to accept that. And I know Stuart was involved in, early on, we were involved in sort of a subcommittee on that. Can you just go over sort of the plan for the next week? I don't know if we want to talk about that now. I just wanted to, the game plan for next month and how that subcommittee worked.
So the auditor will be here and will actually be presenting the drafts to you. They'll have a draft of each of the jurisdictions as well as a summary report that they put together that will list all the findings from different jurisdictions, any of the responses, as well as certain other information that we have them put in tables for you so you can see the maintenance of effort level. You know, do they meet that? The 30%, where are they on that? So that you can see a bunch of tables. We also, for any of the jurisdictions that are not in compliance, we do have a few this time around. We will also be bringing an item B, we have an A and B, where they are requesting an exception to the specific section of the ordinance. There will be a request letter from them, and we discuss that with you, and then we move on to the transportation committee. So that's typically where the chair brings the results of the audits, as well as, and the auditor is there with you, and they really do most of the report to the transportation committee. And we also discuss the exceptions with the transportation committee, and then we take the exceptions to the board of directors. And both the transportation committee and the board are scheduled currently for April. And as long as everything goes as planned, we are within the 60-day period. So we have 60 days from the point that the ITAC chair presents the results of the audit to the transportation committee, to the issuance of the reports, which is then the second week of June, at your June meeting. And in that time, we have some cleanup that goes on in these drafts. There's some of the footnotes will say going to council before June, because they don't know exactly what date. Well, that's going to be populated with an exact date and possibly a resolution number. There might be some other little cleanup items that are okay in draft mode, but we definitely want fixed before the final audit. If there are any substantial changes to the reports, which is typically when we have an exception, those reports are brought back to you with the issuance, the acceptance of the reports in June, so you can see the changes. The auditor will be here at that time as well, and they will talk you through those changes. And then we're done, and we pick the new committee at that time, and we start immediately on the agreed upon procedures for the next year.
Oh, thank you. I know that early on there was some subcommittee that was formed. We did a few emails back and forth, and it's a normal process.
Right.
So
yeah, it's really an upfront for this committee, and unless there's something specific that the committee really needs to be involved in, we just kind of handle all the daily review with the auditors and with the jurisdictions themselves.
Where are the auditors now in their process? Do they start in, let's say, August or September, going to the various local agencies? So now what are they doing? Because we're in February.
Right, so we are in the final stages. They are going through the reviews of the reports, and as they're reviewed by the partner, then they come to us, we do our review, give the okay, then it goes into the draft pot. And there are a couple of jurisdictions that we're working through some final changes, and on a couple of the non-compliance issues, we're working on the reasons for the exception requests for those, so that we have all of that ready. But the plan right now is to have everything finalized by the end of day on Friday, because next week is when we expect to receive the final drafts from the auditor so we can start putting our package together for your next meeting.
Well, thank you, appreciate
Sure.
the update on that.
Yes.
Well, we have, one more item related to, actually two more items, but Ray and Andre,
Morning.
welcome.
Thank you.
Looking forward to this report.
Yeah, so it's actually been quite a turbulent market since the last time that we met. Finally, the FOMC increased the federal funds rate by 25 basis points back in December, putting kind of an end to the drama of anticipation of when rates would finally go up. And although the markets were anticipating some kind of an increase, it's been a real rough ride for the markets. In fact, the S&P had its worst start ever in January, and oil has hit lows that we haven't seen since 2003. Now, with inflation still at below the 2% objective, the federal officials decided in January not to increase rates. However, they kept the window open to potentially increasing rates in March. But I think based on what's going on in the global economy, a lot of market participants think that there will not be an increase in March. In fact, Janet Yellen is talking today, kind of trying to figure out what she's saying because the markets are rallying. So maybe she's going to put a hold on further increases. But markets were anticipating initially maybe 4 increases for the year, but right now we're hearing maybe 1 to 2 at the best. I know that Ray touched on it a little bit earlier as far as the impact to our local economy and sales tax, but we have some more details that we'll get into later. So overall, there's been no change to our debt profile. I'll just kind of summarize it really quickly though. We have $1.5 billion in debt outstanding, of which 71% is fixed and 27% consists of the synthetic fixed rate bonds, which is the variable rate bond, the swap overlays, and 2% in commercial paper. Our debt service is level at $84 million annually, and our coverage right now is 3.25 times, which is very strong, which means that for every $3.25 of sales tax that we receive, $1 goes towards debt service, providing ample coverage. Now, our bond indenture requires us to be at least 2 times over, so 3.25 is about 62% above our requirement. So the high debt service coverage, together with the level annual debt service payment and our fairly conservative debt profile, is what helps us keep our AAA ratings with Fitch and S&P. Now, the last time that we issued bonds was in 2014 for approximately $350 million. We've actually almost spent down those proceeds. So last month we distributed a request for proposal, or RFP, to get another pool of investment bankers that we hope to have for the next 5 years. Once we select that group, then we'll go inside for that group and select who's going to help us with actual 2016 bond financing. Typically we hire a senior manager and a couple of co-managers, but we'll be bringing further details back to you as we go through that process. The RFPs are due later this week, and we intend to do the interviews sometime in March, but hopefully having a group in April and potentially going to the markets in the summer. Now, what's been interesting with the federal rates, Federal Reserve increasing rates by 0.25%, it's actually helped our investments in areas like the Camp and Lake and San Diego County market pool. But on the long term, when you expect that rates may have gone up a little bit too, they've actually come down. Back before they increased rates, they were approximately 3% for the 30-year Treasury. Today they're about 2.5%, so about a 15% decrease. So if things stay the way they are today, when we go to the market, we'll probably do better than what we did in 2014 as far as the financing. In fact, then it was kind of a record low for us, so we could see another record low, which is great. So Sandag, along with its financing team of PFM and Citibank, continue to work and have discussions at the TIFIA office. We've had a number of conference calls. In fact, they were here at our office last month. A couple of officials from the TIFIA office, a couple from the FTA office, kind of going through what we should expect when we get a TIFIA loan. I think they're fairly confident that we'll be getting the TIFIA loan. That's why they actually came down to meet with us, and after they met with us, they actually took a bus ride to actually see the 11-mile corridor where the trolley will be going through. We expect that the TIF year loan will probably get sometime in the second or third quarter of this year, concurrent with when we get the FFGA for $1 billion. And just yesterday in the President's budget, we saw that we have $125 million as opposed to the $100 million that we had put on our plan of finance, which is good news, which means that we don't have to have as much financing costs for the loan. So things are going really well in that aspect too. So at this point, I'll just turn it over to Ray, and then if you have any questions at the end, certainly.
Okay, a couple of questions before Ray gets started. Is there any decisions yet on whether you'll go fixed or variable or synthetic fixed on the upcoming financing?
So that's a great question, and that's a question that we've posed to the investment bankers for them to give us their best ideas coming back. I think one of the things that we're a little bit queasy to do is a variable rate, only because the rating agencies have told us that they don't necessarily like variable rate debt, but there's ways to kind of overcome that by doing maybe a fixed year bond with a 5-year call as opposed to a 10-year, so the duration is a lot smaller. So there's different ways, and that's one of the reasons why we've done the RFP to get the best banking ideas. So again, when we make those decisions, we'll certainly come back to the committee.
Refresh my memory, the existing synthetic you have now, who are the counterparties, and is it through an exchange, or is it mark-to-mark daily? And
so we have Bank of America, Barclays, who are our counterparties to those. They're mark-to-market on a weekly basis. Right now we're in a negative position, but overall the swaps are performing as intended. So so long as there's no reason to take them out, which there is no reason, eventually they should come out.
I was more concerned of what degree of counterparty risk you have inherent in those, and it's weekly, not daily.
Yeah, I mean, again, the counterparty risk is how strong the banks are.
Yeah, that's the question.
Right, and right now, B of A and Barclays have been fairly stable. So, I mean, we obviously watch those swaps, and on a daily basis, they actually post collateral for the portion of ours that is in a positive with Barclays Bank, and so that's something that we do on a daily basis. We either have money coming to us or we have money going back.
Can I ask a quick question? From all the graphs that I've seen, I've gotten the opinion that this will be the last time you're going to the bond market in 2016. Am I wrong?
There may be one more after in 2018.
All right.
Part of why we're doing the TIF year loan, it actually limits the amount of bonds that we're going to introduce. So depending on if we do another TIF year loan, we may not. But right now the plan of finance shows one more.
All right. And all these bonds will mature in 2048. Is that right?
No, the bonds mature every couple of years, actually. So, I mean, the furthest bonds do mature in the last year.
The last bond that you issue
will be 3 months before the end of the ordinance.
3 months before the end of the Transnet
sales
program, which is what, 2048?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, based on our spirited discussion last time of the local and global economy, I thought what I would do is pull a few slides from a presentation that I was putting together, which is kind of the 2016 economic outlook. And as I learn how to work with you, if you can tell me too much, not enough, what you're interested in or not, I just want to change it around. So anyway, with that, I'll just go over some of the things that I put together. And these things are basically the things that we're looking at that kind of impact at the end of the day what the regional economy looks like and what sales taxes would be here. So this is the Department of Economic Consensus, and I think if you listen to the news, this is what you see right now. So about 20% of the economists right now are forecasting that we might go into a recession in 2016, and then on the flip side, 80% I guess are saying that's not going to happen this year, that it's probably going to be more like 2017 or 2018. So there's some slowing in the economy.
I have to chuckle. Ray starts off by saying he's trying to ascertain how to deal with us. He starts off with cartoons.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Bad news too.
There's a message there.
I
And,
understand
in your professional experience, would you say that there, with economists broadly, there tends to be a bias either towards being optimistic or pessimistic, or you wouldn't say that there?
No, I absolutely think there's a bias. I think that every day there's new information that's released that will change somebody's mind from one direction to another. So oil prices will do something. People who look at that as being a key driver of the economy, for instance, will go one way or the other. People who follow the tech industry, for instance, look like we're coming up towards a tech bubble possibly because there are some weakening in the prices of some of the big tech companies. So depending on who you're listening to, I think all of these things have impacts.
But you wouldn't say that there's systemic bias towards being more positive or more negative. For example, just my own experience, I think, you know, it seems to me that, you know, Wall Street tends to be biased towards positive because that helps generate,
Right.
you know, trading activity and investment, and it's in their interest to do so. You know, when you characterize the 80-20, I'm curious as to whether that would just be typical or if that's.
I think you'll see that change. I tend to be a little bit more cautious about what's going on, just because I think there are a lot of things in the economy that are affecting what's happening that people are kind of dismissing as not a big deal. But I think that in general, you're right. Wall Street would want generally a bull market, right? That's what they would want, because that's where they make the majority of their money. So when you listen to the financial news and economists there, you're going to get a more positive or rosy outlook. But in a lot of cases, I think that, I mean, there's so many things that impact the economy. Usually when I start a presentation, I ask people, like, how do you feel about the economy? You know, do you think we're doing better or worse? And it's always 50-50, and it's because, what are you thinking? Some people are thinking, well, you know, oil prices are down, I'm feeling good about my personal job, I'm feeling good about whatever. And they're feeling good about the economy. Other people are looking at some of the world news, and for instance, they don't feel good about the economy. So to me, I think it's really the point of view that you're looking at. But I think if there was a bias, it'd probably be towards the positive. Nobody likes to be a Debbie Downer. So the World Bank is typically relatively optimistic, and so this is their forecast, and they forecast globally the slowest growth since 1990. So globally, they've gone from 3.3% down to 2.8%. But as you can see in the green, they forecast that the United States was going to be up 2.4%. This is for the end of 2015, and that mature markets were going to be up 2.1%. Well, I think the U.S. came in at 1.8%, so there's an additional slowing that wasn't taken into account when these forecasts came out. So globally, the economy seems to be slowing. You know, my particular feeling is that China's probably slower than that. That's just what they're reporting. I think that there's a lot of underreporting in terms of how bad the situation is over there. So that's something that I would continue to watch, because that has a big impact on us. You know, this is the oil price trend for 5 years, and I put this in because it's interesting for other reasons too. But as you can see, I mean, it's just absolutely plummeted. And this should be good news for consumers, because it should make you know, people have more money available to spend on things, because they're not spending it on gas. In certain places, in 5 states, we're looking at close to $1.11 on the average for gas. Okay,
Never
so,
in San Diego.
well, you don't see that in San Diego. In fact, you know, and I'll have another graph later, but basically San Diego, we're where we were last year. So we haven't benefited from these decreases, but the rest of the nation has. And yes, sir.
Yeah. I was just curious, and maybe you cover this later, and tell me, wait till later. Relative to the national impacts, does San Diego County tend to be more or less or average auto dependent, so that when you have decreases that would show up in the pump, does our local economy or does the consumer tend to benefit, you know, more or less than average?
Well, we're probably more auto dependent than other places in the country.
Okay.
The issue we have is that we're not downward elastic. It seems that there's a bottom here for gas prices around 250 that we really can't go below for whatever reason, whether it's the formulation, the distribution. There's a bunch of components in there, and it was something that I wanted to look a little bit more into at a future date. But there seems to be some stickiness in terms of us being able to react downwards in terms of the price of gas.
So to the extent that we've gotten some benefit for the consumer, we've probably gotten about as much as we're likely to get.
That would be my belief. I don't think that our gas prices are going to go down much further. I think you're going to see, there'll probably be places in the nation that can fall under $1 a gallon. You're going to hear that in the next couple of months, and it's going to make all the news, and we're going to be going, how come not us? But that's typical of California and San Diego, where we have the highest gas prices in the continental United States.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, this is good and bad for businesses. So any business that relies on using fuel in delivering their goods or whatever, this is really good for them. So you're going to see them become more profitable. They can hire additional people. But it's bad for any of the oil producing or energy producing companies. And I think you're going to see some fallout there if the prices remain low. And I think all the forecasts would show that the prices will remain low because there's a tremendous amount of oil on the market right now, and there's no consensus between the oil producing companies to actually, countries to actually reduce the amount of oil that they're pumping, primarily Saudi Arabia. And on the good news, I always try to put good news in here too. It's bad for ISIS because they have less money to fund their operations if the oil prices are low. So nationally, you know, the U.S. is still doing better than other areas within the globe. So that's a positive sign for us. These numbers, like I said, probably should be revised to talk a little bit more about that the U.S. grew to up 1.8% next year. And some of the positive trends that we see are the existing sales of housing, and housing drives a large part of the market. And last year, housing was up from the year prior, it's up to 7.7%. Average price of housing also went up, and this is good for people who own houses because they now have equity in the houses after the Great Recession took away a lot of the equity that they had. Inventory levels are down, which also tend to show that there's a strong housing market. At the time I did this, gas prices were at $1.82 was the national average, so they were down 11.5% year over year. Unemployment was down, so more people working means more tax revenue. And we had just heard that the federal fundraise rate went up by 0.25%. I don't know that that had a big impact on anything, so I just kind of put that in yellow. So that was kind of what's happening nationally. Some of the interesting things or things to watch were the lingering problems of 2016. And it has to do with underemployment and employment. So what happens is that we report the unemployment rate down, and it's down to 5% now. But what's happening is that you have, if you look at the red over there, the blue is the unemployment. You see that's been steadily coming down as we came out of the recession. The long-term unemployment, the green, that's gone down as the extended benefits have started to run out. But what you see is part-time employment actually growing, which is the red. So that's not represented in the unemployment rate that's reported. But what happens there, and you can think about it, is in all likelihood, it's because people are having to take jobs that are below their skill level, and they're not employed at a full level, or they're taking 2 jobs to try to make enough money to pay their bills. So that's a weakening trend that doesn't bode well in the future. And what's happened, if you look at the real wages, and this is where you start to hear some of this discontent with the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, that type of a thing. In real dollar terms, if you look at what's happened, the top 25% of earners have increased in terms of their real weekly wages since 2000. But you can see that both the bottom 25% and the median are actually, this is the national figure, are below where they were in terms of real buying power since 2000. So the majority of the people right now have less purchasing power than they did 15 years ago. And I think that's an important thing to watch. So as much as we're having more jobs, the jobs that are coming online are low paying or part-time.
Thank you, Bernie Sanders.
Okay, let's-
Your chart on the left, if my eyeball is good and that's your question, obviously the trends are very good when you put all three of the components together, but the total is almost as low as it was before the crash. And you're pointing out your concerns about the part-time, but my eyeball says the part-time today is no larger than it was before the crash in absolute numbers.
Right, so it's back to where it was, but what I think the difference is that the people who are in that category right now are people who are underemployed. I don't know that was necessarily the case in 2008 as much as it is now.
So there's a further
Yeah.
delineation within the red.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we don't have those numbers, but I'm thinking that
Okay.
people in the green who are going back to work are saying my unemployment benefits are running out. I need to take a job, so I'm going to take a lower paying job in possibly a different industry because I need to make the money.
So you think the composition of the red today is
Yes.
different than it was back then?
That's
Because
what
the
I-
absolute, it's the same.
Yeah, that would would be the same number, but I believe that the composition is
Okay.
different. And
Okay.
that's what's, and that's why the real weekly wages is what I'm looking at, which is more indicative of how people feel, I think.
Do you have any indication or any personal feel for, is there incipient wage inflation coming? And there's certain segments of the economy, healthcare, for example, where we're starting to see some very significant inflation in wages already. And I'm curious about the national averages, whether they're biased by the oil patch, where we've had a huge negative hit on the oil patch, and is that overwhelming the statistics in the rest of the sector where we're actually seeing wage improvements?
You know, there's different wage increases by sector, but I haven't looked at them closely enough to answer that. But if that's interesting, I can absolutely present that next time. That'd be interesting. I don't have the broken out.
We're seeing in some sectors, we're seeing some very real wage increases.
Absolutely.
Healthcare.
In high tech, biotech, there's pressure, and it depends on, it's supply and demand of the employees in those industries is what drives a lot of that.
But to what extent that starts showing up in the national aggregate is a question.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm curious if if that purple bar there, or data, the discouraged workers, are those actual statistics
That's
hard numbers?
Yeah.
Or is that kind of, okay, and then I'm curious as to if you happen to know if, this became a popular topic in the media, since the financial crisis. I'm curious how long those statistics were kept, if you happen to know if the numbers prior to 2008 were meaningfully different or not. It seems to be, it sort of blips up and down. The numbers are much smaller than the others. So it's
Are
hard
you
to say,
talking
but-
specifically about discouraged workers?
Yeah.
So those series go back further than 2008, and we have unemployment numbers back all the way to the 40s. I don't know if we have them broken out though by the 4 different categories, but I certainly could look.
No, I was just curious if you happen to know if basically again, the whole discouraged worker thing became very popular in the press, but it actually seems like it's not a meaningful issue in relation to what you were previously describing about
Well, underemployment and discouraged workers are different. Discouraged workers are those that they don't think that they can job, and
They stopped looking.
and they're not looking. They're actively not looking for a job. The unemployed are actually actively looking for a job.
Right.
So, yeah, I could go back further with this series to see what it looks like, but
No, I was just curious if you happen to know.
so despite California seems to be a bright spot despite all of the things that we do to ourselves to try to slow down growth over here. And employment growth happens to be about 50% higher than the nation. Is that not? The interesting thing here is really the quality of the jobs that are improving, and the entire tech sector is basically headquartered out of the Silicon Valley. And 1 out of 4 jobs that are created in California are in the high wage paying sectors. And so that's really helping us out significantly by having a lot of those high paying jobs being built here, created here. Home sales are up. They're Nationally, they were 7.7%, we're 9.8% up in California. There are some structural labor issues, and that's basically the mid-level, and I'll have a little bit more information about San Diego coming up about that. Exports are down because of the strong dollar. Housing affordability is a huge issue statewide, as it is here in San Diego, and that's something that probably needs to be taken care of or looked at the state level. And then, like I think we talked about last time too, the whole drought El Nino thing, it has an impact on the farming industry, and who knows what's really going to happen with El Nino and how much, whether or not we get out of the drought and what the impacts are long term. So San Diego, we continue to progress and slowly, but we continue to move forward, even though there are these economic headwinds, as they call them, at the national level. Employment was up 3.5% year over year. The innovation sector, which is the sector of the high-tech, the biotech and high-tech that you hear about, that's up 7.4% here in the region. That also pushes wages up in that particular sector. Detached housing sales were up 6.8%. Unemployment fell to 4.7%, which is below the national average. Gas prices, and the reason I have that in red is because it hasn't gone down since last year, and because I'm personally not happy with that, I'm saying that's a bad thing. But like we talked about already, that I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to be able to be changed. And housing affordability is down to 24% already, and we've only seen a little bit of increase in terms of housing prices. So to me, that's a concern long term. What's interesting to me when I look at the jobs and employment, and again, this is because this is where the revenue is generated from, we lead the U.S. in terms of new job growth. And you can see the red line. We really took a dump after the recession, and we started to increase, and by 2013 we were ahead of the nation in terms of job creation. And you can see that we're increasing at a pretty healthy pace compared to the regions, the nation. So the region here in San Diego is doing better than the region, the nation. Unemployment rate, you can see too, we had a higher unemployment rate here during the Great Recession, so we got hit really hard, and we have finally caught up, and last year we finally fell below the national average in terms of unemployment. So that's, again, that speaks to a strong economy here in San Diego in relative terms to the United States. I took a look at what happened structurally to jobs between the last time we peaked and now. And when you look at by industry, you'll see that not all jobs recovered at the same rate. So this is starting to lead towards structural changes in the economy. And we increased 81,000 net jobs, almost 82,000 jobs in the time period from December 07 to November 15, which was the latest data that I had. But you'll see that we never got back to the same level that we were at in 2007 in terms of construction, manufacturing, and the information and financial services industry. So we still have fewer jobs here than we had in 2007. And you'll see that the growth came primarily in education and health services, along with professional and business services. Professional business services is where most of the high tech is categorized, as well as the tourism industry, which is categorized under the leisure and hospitality. So this shows you where the jobs have been created in the economy. And you'll see these type of structural shifts every time we go through recession. When the military, downsize, for instance, you'll see a lot of shift. And this is just pointing to what's happening to the economy. The reason this is important is that 70% of the jobs that were created here in the region since the recession, since 2010, have been in low-paying jobs in the low-paying sectors. So these people typically make below $1,058 per week on average. So that's less than a $50,000 job. And if you think about what housing prices and the cost of living are here in San Diego, that's a lot of the problem where the affordability comes in. Professional and business services is a high-paying sector. That's where, like I said, the high-tech is, and you'll see that there's been, it's a relatively large sector here in San Diego now, and there's been 17% of the job growth was in that particular sector. So to me, the reason that this is interesting is because it shows where the jobs are being created, and this is where we talked about is, it's like, are they part-time jobs? But they're in industries that are hospitality, healthcare, education. That's what's really driving the San Diego economy right now. For San Diego, we actually fare a little bit better than the nation when we look at this in real dollar terms, but I adjusted San Diego wages for real dollar terms to see what's happened since 2004. And what you'll see that the there's been very little increase, especially on the bottom part of the spectrum in terms of how much real buying power people have. So real dollar wages are up by 0.18% annually for those who are in the bottom 25%, and it's up about 1.9% annually, 1.09% annually for the top 25% of wage earners. Okay? So again, it's like we collect sales tax revenue. Where do we collect it from? These are the people who are purchasing retail. What you see is that we haven't had a lot of additional growth in income, which means that you don't have more money available necessarily to spend on those retail sales. So who's really getting hurt? And the reason I wanted to look at this is to see, where the impact is of having these low-paying jobs, and as we came out of the recession, who really benefited. And you'll see that the top 20%, now these are national data, we don't have this for San Diego, but I think that this holds true probably for our area too. The top 20% of income earners have increased in terms of their median family income since the recession, as have people who have college degrees. But when you look at who's been hurt, you'll see that it's the bottom 20% where they've actually had a decrease in their real income, along with families, seniors, and then particularly young families. And we do have a large proportion of young families here in San Diego, and you can see that they're now living on almost 5% less income than they had in 2010, which was at the bottom of the recession. So this is, to me, again, it's just an indicator that I'm looking at to see how we're doing. An indicator that I'm looking at to see.
Is there any analogous demographic data as to where the sales tax revenue actually comes from a demographic standpoint?
We've tried to figure out how it comes. We have it. We know what type of businesses it comes from, so we know what type of sales, whether it's furniture or it's automobiles, or we can figure that type of thing out. What we can't really figure out, though, without doing some type of model, is who is spending on what. But in a lot of cases, there's in terms of retail, there are certain things that you buy that are taxed, and the younger families are the ones who probably are paying the most in terms of a proportion of their income, because they're the ones who have to be paying for their kids' stuff too. So a lot of it has to do with family size.
That chart is nominal dollars, or is that purchasing power adjusted?
These are adjusted for inflation. So if you don't adjust it for inflation, it looks like everybody's doing better.
It's in the title, sorry.
Yeah. San Diego housing, again, one of my concerns really is housing affordability and how that impacts everything. So I kind of took a look at this, and it's quite interesting. The average U.S. housing price is $179,000. In California, it's $437,000. So we're 244% higher here in California than the nation. But then if you take a look at it, San Diego prices are only about 8% higher than California. Okay, so we're about 263% higher than the United States. And you'll see that the coastal communities, so Florida, if you take a look at, for instance, San Francisco, it's 531% higher than the nation. And it's twice as expensive as anywhere than the median here in California. If you look at the inland areas like Riverside, San Bernardino, Bakersfield, you see that they're actually below the California average and even possibly below the national average. The interesting thing here is that it's the coastal communities that are above average, okay? It's the inland areas that aren't. And we've heard, and we suspected, that there are more people who are starting to live in the Inland Empire and working here in San Diego because of the price of housing and the cost of living. So one of the reasons I wanted to start to follow this is to see what the impact is there of the delta in the housing prices, because you can see San Diego is probably, and it's approaching twice as expensive as Riverside area in terms of housing. Area.
Is that consistent with the previous report we had and a long-term view of the transportation demands from the housing? Something sticks in my head that it was surprising that we're seeing more of a concentration or higher density in close versus a dispersion of people to those outlying cheaper housing.
Well, so a lot of what the regional plan is doing is encouraging higher density areas so that it reduces the amount of transportation required. So the 2015 plan is significantly denser than the plan was for 1990.
That's a plan for encouragement as distinct from reality of where people are driven to buy homes.
As those housing units, and I have, I think the next slide shows the units. What you'll see is that prior to the recession, about 55% of the housing units that were being built were single-family homes. And what you see after the recession is that 66% are multifamily permits, which essentially to me is saying that those are less expensive units that are more in line with what people can afford here. So part of it is people coming to terms of living in multifamily housing who have typically thought about living in more of a suburban sprawl area, that they need to, that as they change the way, as the millennials become older and they prefer living in this type of region, which is these more multifamily, less expensive homes. So that's what this one is showing here. And you can see in 2015 that there was significantly more multifamily permits. So this is the trend that I think speaks to it that we've been talking about. And the housing price index continues to tick up since the recession. And then this is an affordability index that I borrowed from the San Diego Realtors Association. And to me, what was interesting is that, historically since 1991, we've been kind of between the 20 and 40% of the families are able to purchase their own home. And at the height of right before the real estate bubble, it was down to 9%. I think that was a pretty well reported figure. And you see how it spiked up during the recession to where nearly half the people could purchase houses. The problem that we had there, though, is that a lot of those houses that went into foreclosure were flips, and they were all cash sales, and they were purchased by, not necessarily by homeowners getting a great deal on a house or actually being able to enter the housing market. They were purchased and then turned into rentals. So that, again, it didn't necessarily increase the home ownership. And now as prices start to tick up, you see that home ownership again is down to about 24%, which is kind of at the bottom of that band, which to me is where, at that point it becomes hard for new families to get into the housing market. Housing drives a lot of taxable retail sales too, right? Because everything you're buying for your house is taxed, and so that's another thing that we can look at. And here's the taxable sales. We talked a little bit about this, but you see that in 2015 taxable sales were up, and it's continued to increase since the bottom of the recession. What you see on the annual percent change is that the annual percent change has started to moderate in the last couple of years. And that's really, this is kind of the basis for why some of the forecasts that we show that possibly going forward it's going to be lower. If we go into a recession anytime soon, I would imagine that those numbers would come down. If we start to recover, for whatever reason, you'll probably see those numbers go back up.
So long term, what would you say our sales tax revenue correlates to? GDP growth?
It correlates to a couple of things, primarily to population and jobs, because population and jobs are correlated, but the sales tax revenue is correlated to how many people are working and how much they're spending.
I mean, great big picture, if the economy in general is only growing X, would we expect over time sales revenue to be growing anything different than that X?
No. That's
So
typically
3.5% is still a healthy number.
It's healthy. It's healthy here, and that's because our region is healthier than most other regions, and I think that's the overall picture. I mean, I point out a lot of the, like where there's potential problems, but those are the ones that I'm watching now, primarily because there is some weakening, and nationally, believe it or not, it's about time for us to go into another recession. And so, from my perspective, what's important to watch are the trends that are on the negative side right now, rather than the super positive ones, because these are the ones that are going to be the gotcha, right? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm wondering, because Brad was talking about the, big get-together in March, talking about whether or not we should put another measure on the ballot for transient tax. If I'm one of these people in the majority, which says I'm not feeling very good about myself or my income, why would I want to vote for a tax increase? I mean, what you're telling me is kind of depressing for a tax measure.
Well, oh, for a tax measure, okay.
Yeah,
thought-
I mean,
if you
because-
think I'm depressing, I can try to do it a little bit more fun. Or maybe I'll wear a crazy tie or something for you next time.
Your shoes were good, though. I like
Okay,
it.
thank you. I think a tax measure it's a different issue, because if you take a look, for instance, at commute times here in San Diego, they're significantly better than they are in other metropolitan areas like Atlanta, Orange County, or comparable places where places are built up like here. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've done a tremendous job taking essentially 40 years worth of infrastructure development, borrowing against that income stream, and building out a lot of this infrastructure so that people can enjoy it now, and it increases their quality of life. So, whether or not, on the one hand, you're right. It's like people don't want to be additionally taxed because of the reasons that you're saying, because I don't feel good about it. But they don't necessarily want to be taxed if things are being good either. I think really the proof is in the pudding when it comes to transportation. And it has to do with the fact that people who live in Santee, for instance, can now have a 30% commute, a shorter commute to Sorrento Valley where they used to work. The reason I pulled that one out is because that was my commute for 15 years. And those type of infrastructure improvements help the economy locally. It keeps us being able to move goods and services between businesses. And these things need to be paid for, right? And I think what Sandak has done is that we've done a good job spending the money that we have on those infrastructure improvements that are necessary to keep a system here in the economy that provides for businesses to have an infrastructure to get their employees from where they live to where they work in a reasonable amount of time.
I like that answer. Makes sense.
Do you guys have any other questions?
Andre, Ray, good tag team there.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you.
You asked for trying to fill your way to what we were seeking. As far as I'm concerned, that was your right-on.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you guys another 3 months.
It's easy to understand, too.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Item 11, Sarah and Keith is here as well, right? I see Keith moving, that's why.
I'm moving, I'm just gonna support.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Now for something completely different. We're going to be talking about the EMP Land Management Grant Program. So item 11 on the ITALC agenda describes the eligibility, submittal, and evaluation criteria for a proposed competitive land management grant cycle to implement the Transnet Environmental Mitigation Program. You'll note that item 4 on the agenda details some of the achievements under the EMP. 6,500 acres have been conserved, about 1,400 acres of invasive species have been removed, and 400 acres of habitat have been restored. And the land management grants that I'm going to be talking about today are an integral component of that EMP. So the EMP program is implemented through a strategy that's outlined in the MOA that was signed by Sandak, Caltrans, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2008, and then amended in 2013. That MOA allocates about $4 million per year to provide regional land management and biological monitoring to maintain our regional preserve system. This funding provides a safety net for our investments while helping to avoid the listing of endangered species. The board adopted a 2-year work plan in September 2015 to identify tasks required to implement regional management and monitoring. And per that MOA, allocations for the fiscal year totaling $4 million are reviewed and approved annually by the Sandak board. And that allows the board to make modifications and any necessary adjustments to that funding. Roughly half of that funding has been used over the past 7-8 years for a competitive land management grant program. So the purpose of the land management grant program is to assist regional land managers with the protection of threatened, rare, and endangered species, and to enhance their habitats to avoid future listing of endangered species while promoting regional habitat conservation planning. There have been 7 previous grant cycles that have awarded 81 grants through a competitive process. About $12.8 million have been awarded, and another $8.4 million in matching funds have been provided by grantees. Some of these past projects have included signage, fencing, directional walkways to protect habitats and species, the introduction of endangered species, exotic species removal, and the recovery of habitat that was burned in previous wildfires. And the location of those projects is shown up on the map here. Sandag staff are proposing an 8th cycle of land management grants. So the fiscal year 2016-2017 work plan for the EMP Regional Management and Monitoring includes about $1.8 million for the 8th cycle of land management grants. An ad hoc committee of the EMP working group met to discuss this next cycle in November 2015, and they determined that for the land management grants to be most effective at achieving regional conservation goals, that about $800,000 should be allocated to fill existing funding gaps that would help land managers with short-term stewardship actions, and another $1 million should be allocated towards longer-term, larger-scale habitat restoration and enhancement projects. Projects in this threat reduction stewardship category can be awarded $50,000 each, and they should be completed within 18 months of receiving a notice to proceed. And this recommendation for that smaller funding cap came from applicants in previous cycles. You noted that having a lot of smaller awards would allow more grantees to use that money for what they needed to do those kind of stewardship actions on their land. And then projects in the species and habitat recovery category can be awarded a maximum of $1 million, and those projects should be completed within 3 to 5 years of receiving a notice to proceed. And the cap of $1 million was selected here just to give the maximum flexibility in awarding those grants. So potentially one project could receive that funding, or it could be split between multiple projects. So, excuse me, let me go back one. So eligible activities include some of those that I mentioned before: signage, directional fencing, invasive species removal, and recovery of habitat. A simplified, shorter application was created for the grants in the threat reduction stewardship category, and that was just to make the application process more manageable for those managers who are seeking those smaller amounts of funding. Grant applications in both of the categories are going to be evaluated based on how they address high priority sensitive species, if success criteria for the projects have been identified, and how likely the success of that project is. And the availability of matching funds will also be used as an evaluation criteria for the projects in the species and habitat recovery category. The applications are included in attachments 2 and 3 of the report, and then that evaluation criteria is detailed in the program overview and instructions within attachment 1. So the information presented to you today will also be shared with the Board of Directors at the end of the month. If the Board of Directors approves the evaluation, eligibility, and submittal criteria for the land management grants, the call for projects is anticipated to be released sometime in March or April, and then a public workshop will be held near that time to address questions from potential applicants. Grant applications will be due in May, and application review will follow in the summer. And then staff will present the evaluation committee's recommendations for awards to the ITOC, EMP Working Group, Regional Planning Committee, Transportation Committee, and the Board of Directors in the fall. And those grant agreements will be executed sometime next winter. So today this item comes before the ITOC just so that the committee can review the land management grants consistency with the Transnet Extension Ordinance and Expenditure Plan, and any input from the ITOC will be forwarded to the Board of Directors at the end of the month. So Keith and I are here to answer any questions you might have about this proposed 8th cycle of grants.
Here's typical with these types of grants, is there any follow-up reporting requirement?
So they have a quarterly reporting requirement, so we do get progress reports, and then there's always a final report at the end of the project, so we can look back and see not only how that money was spent, but also, what was achieved and did it meet the goals. And then just this past summer, we actually did have a staff member do an audit of about 25 projects.
So, back to the invoicing is always tied to a quarterly report. No quarterly report, no month ending. And then Sarah was saying, last summer, we actually took a look at a subset of these 81 grants that have been completed. And we said, have they been effective? And are they making a lasting difference? And the answer is, yeah, they are effective, and they are making a lasting difference, and they're helping to fill those gaps that these land managers don't have. And probably the proof in the pudding has been but we haven't had any species listed as endangered in the last 10 years in San Diego County. Whereas the previous 10 years, we've had numerous species listed. So it's really helping out. Sarah had a picture up there of this bird. That bird should be listed as endangered, but for the fact that we've actually put a lot of funding regionally and from outside the region into protecting its habitat.
And then would, in looking at future grants, would the extent to which somebody has had prior history, prior grant, and their effectiveness be a part of what would be weighted in a future grant application?
It's part of the criteria that actually says, have you applied for a past grant and how successful was it?
Gotcha. Okay, great, thank you.
It's a sort of follow-up question on the, I live near an area that has a lot of these signs and trails in the last 3 or 4 years that's been put up. And again, how do folks go up and see how effective they've been and keeping people off trails and things like that? Because I sometimes might sneak underneath one of those things. But, I was just curious if anyone's going to come up there. But are they?
We have you on video.
Are they effective? I mean, how's that going? How's it going overall?
So the answer is yes. As part of both the land manager's requirements to report to us, and then a part of our auditing, we go out and audit these projects to see how effective they are. And the answer has been, in many cases, it's been very successful. The fence, the little brown fence there, goes along Proctor Valley, and it's cut off-highway vehicles from going off. So successful that you can't see that trails that were there. You can see from aerial imagery, you can see the growth that's come back.
Yeah, I live in Torrey Hills area, so it's true. Since there's more growth around that area. The other follow-up on the other species and habitat recovery, it says 3 to 5 years. This program overall is a 10-year program for the grants. So this will go into past 2018 as far as the funding is concerned. Is there any overlap? Is there a need? I mean, I guess they wouldn't ask for more money, but how's that work when this program is supposedly on in 2018 and this goes past that date?
We'll encumber the funds now, and then there will be no additional funds provided to them. They will live off those encumbered funds as the projects are completed.
Keith, do you foresee that we're going to have to keep this grant program going as long as we have lands that are supposed to be environmentally protected? Because it's not like you say, oh, this is great, we don't have any threat to this species, now we don't have to have any monitoring. That will never happen, will it?
You've asked a big question, because on one hand we have a funding measure that's going forward, and if that goes forward, one of the impetuses has been to fund these type of future efforts, not out of Transnet, but out of this new funding measure. So leaving that aside, if, regardless of that, will Transnet be responsible for these gap measures? And the answer is, I don't know. We're going to be reinitiating the memorandum of agreement, which expires in 2018, along with the whole review of the Transnet 10-year annual, that's a 10-year review, decadal review, to see how successful it was. And we have to show there's an economic benefit generated for these grant programs to continue. So I can't answer your question yet, but it's not all on San Diego's back to provide these grants. But these are a very effective way of providing some efforts at this point in time.
Okay.
My question is a numbers question. You're on your threat reduction grants. You've got 800,000 available, and you want each grant to be approved to be less than 50,000. So you expect to award at least 16 grants, perhaps more, if they're smaller. But my question is on the species and habitat. You've got $1 million to award, and you say the maximum grant could be $1 million, and it's a 3 to 5 year program. How many grants do you expect to award under species and habitat recovery? Does that question make sense?
Absolutely, and it's come up before. The $1 million cap, which is basically all the funding, it's allowed the maximum flexibility. So if there's one project that has multiple partners, that is a great project, we didn't want to say, oh, well, that couldn't be funded because it takes up all the funding. It may be just the project that should be funded. Conversely, we didn't want to have, we might have 3 or 4 projects. We just want to see what comes into the RFP process.
Thank
Any other comments? Thank you, Tim. Very good. Well, I'm gonna lose Stuart, and so the timing is perfect. So, future meeting scheduled March 9th. It looks like I may not be here. Hopefully Stuart can fill in, and we have a quorum that day. And then the items on the to report, like Lisa said, we'll go over to the independent auditor and request for exemptions for ordinance requirements and two other progress report on Transnet Major Corridor projects. So it should be a good meeting. That adjourned. Or can I get a motion to adjourn? So moved. Thank you.